Android debugging can be thought of being similar to police detective work. We're looking for the source of our problem. Police detectives are looking for criminals. And we both have a limited amount of clues to how identify our problems or criminals. So let's put on our Detective Morse hats and watch this tutorial. Software programming debugging can be referred to as a black art. Good debuggers normally have a lot of experience to fall back on, and through the experience they also hone and develop instincts which help them identify problems that they might have not ever seen before. Anyway, for those who are new to starting out with debugging, in this case Android debugging using Android Studio, it's good to have a basic list together of working through systematic steps just to help guide you in helping isolate the cause of your problem. And on my website here I've put together a bit of a list. The list might change depending on what sort of problems you get, but it's good for you to develop your own list, systematic list to step through. And so I have a list here. I'll briefly describe it. First of all, confirm that there is a problem. If you're using an Android Nexus device, you might not see the problem, but your customer or client might be using a different device with different types of code and environment, and they may have a problem, but it might be on different parts of the code that you may not even support. So first, identify that there is an issue that you need to look at. And then if you can confirm that there is an issue, your application is crashing on the device itself, good place to go is to go to the Android Studio debug monitor trace. That will help confirm that there is a problem and help give you a high level update of what that problem might be. Also inside the Android Studio debug trace, you'll be able to see if the trace is pointing to any lines of code from your application. And that's a good place to initially start to investigate. After that, if you can find any lines of code indicating lines of your code, your application code, where you think there might be a problem, start using the SDK documentation to see if any of the problems you're seeing in your debug relating to your lines of code, there are documentations that refer to those problems that may happen. So start referring to the SDK documentation at that stage, and that should give you more information and help you identify and start isolating the cause of your problem. And then you want to identify even further, so you can set up some breakpoints in your code and run your application in debug mode to see if you can help seeing where exactly in your code the problem is happening. And then also, if you haven't fully identified the problem by then, you can intercept some debug trace into your application to see the behavior of the application, if the behavior is not behaving as you would expect. And your debug logs can help sort of give you an indication of what's happening when by printing out those states, and then that can help identify the cause of the problem there as well. And so this problem is relating to a problem that people are seeing on Samsung Series 5 devices on the camera to video application. They are seeing that crashing, and it's not a trivial problem, so this is why I've set up a Android debugging tutorial to help isolate that problem. Okay, so let's make a start. From the previous tutorial, the end of the previous tutorial, I ran the code on a Samsung Note 4 and could actually see that there is a problem. We had the application crash. So confirm there is an issue. There is an issue. That's confirmed. Now let's check the debug monitor trace, and we can see we're getting a fatal main exception and the camera device is closed. So the camera device being closed, something's gone wrong. So camera device is actually closed. We can no longer use our application. Our application's got a fatal flaw in it. It's going to close. So debug trace, yes. We are definitely confirming there's a problem debug trace. So let's go down to the next one. See if we can identify the lines of code. And down here, we are seeing lines of code, and normally you'd start at the top of the trace and work your way down. So we're seeing in line 316 we're seeing a problem in the start preview method. So let's click on that and I'll close this. Okay, so in here when we're trying to create a capture request, let me open up a window. When we're trying to create a capture request, we're seeing a problem. It's either before the request, the camera device could be null, or actually making this call is causing the application to crash. So there's something not quite right there. Okay, let me go back to my list here. Okay, so let's refer to the SDK documentation here. So I can just press F1, bring up the documentation, try and expand that. So inside this documentation, I want to see what happens if something goes wrong. So down here, throws, this will tell me what sort of exceptions I can get. So there's 3 types of receptions I can get if the call has failed. So let's go back to my code here and open up the Android monitor again. So look here, I'm getting a legal state exception. So I'll just highlight that. I'm getting a legal state exception. So if I go back to my documentation and click on this. Okay, illegal state exception if the camera device has been closed. Okay, so let's check to see if that's been closed. So I'm going to run, let's go back to my reference. So I'm going to now set up some breakpoints to see if I can isolate the problem. I'm going to set a breakpoint right on that call there. Okay, and I want to see if I have an active camera device or not. So I need to open up Samsung Series 5 device. And now we're going to run in debug mode. Application started. Let's reproduce the steps we did to get the problem. Okay, so I've now stopped at the breakpoint. I want to check to see if I've got an active camera device, and I do. My camera device is still set up and configured. That's not null basically. Okay, so let's step down to the next line. And already I'm getting the uncaught exception. Something has gone wrong. So by trying to create a request to the camera device, we've got a problem there. Okay, so something's happening wrong making that call. Okay, so let me go back to my documentation there. So I put a line in there, and I haven't actually made that much more progress because we know the problem's on that line, but we don't know actually why, or the cause to why we're seeing the problem there. Okay, so we know that there was a problem with trying to create a capture request. We saw that in debug, but we've got no further in isolating our problem. So quite often you have to sometimes think outside of the box, or think on a larger level, try and get a broader overview of the problem. What are we trying to do here? We're trying to start a preview. Basically, we want to try and start a capture request session. So, and it's going to be a preview request session. So that's failing. And so down here you can see we're trying to create the capture request session. And prior to that, we had a recording capture session happening. So let's look at the documentation for camera capture session, because what we're trying to do is we need to close the record session before we can start the preview session. And same again, close the preview session before we start record session. So before a new session can start, a preview session can start, we need to close the record session. So let's have a look at the documentation for the capture session and a look at references to illegal state exceptions. So I'm going to go to Google and do a search on the class of camera capture session. There it is there, click on that. Now I want to do a search for illegal state, illegal state exception. Okay, and it's already given, I just want to have a look at the first reference to it here. It's in the class overview here. So if a new session is created, we're trying to create a previous session, then the previous session is closed and its associated onso's callback will be invoked. All of these session methods will throw an illegal state exception if called once a session is closed. So potentially if I'm trying to create a new capture request and maybe the record capture session is not closed, I may see a problem. So let's do a bit more of a search on it. So there's abort captures, capture, let me keep searching here. I just want to see what methods are called, capture burst, and close. Okay, I want to see what happens if it's closed, when a session is closed. So closing a session frees up the target output services of the session for reuse for a new session. Okay, so we're using multiple sessions here. We're using preview services that are going to need to use some of these output surfaces and record sessions. So we share surfaces with our sessions. And so let's go to the code here. And so when we try to create a capture request, we are adding a preview surface. And that surface is also shared of the record capture request as well. So in other words, when we stop recording, we need to free up all these surfaces we're using so they can get reused for our start preview as such. So we've got an indication here that one session must be fully closed before another session can be created, and that should happen for you automatically, but I suspect it might not be happening on the Samsung devices that we're looking at. Okay, so normally you don't need to call this. When you create a new session, the previous session on close will be called, but you can call it if you need to. So what we want to do is we want to check between our Nexus device and our Samsung device to see the operation of behavior, whether one session's on close is being called prior to the previous session starting. Okay, and to enable us to do that, is a good way is to set up some breakpoint, to set up some debug logs. So I'm going to add some debug logs first to this. First of all, we need to go to our camera capture session stallbacks and implement the on close for both the preview and the record. Override methods, and here we have on closed. Okay, so we've got one on close there, and I need to do the same again for the on record. Okay, so we've implemented these on closed. So these get called right before the session's closed, capture session's closed, freeing up all your surfaces as well. And so that's quite important. Okay, so let's add some debug. Okay, so I'm going to add a tag just to make it easier for me to refer to my debug. Okay, I'm going to put my tag right at the very top. That's going to be a string. And I'm going to make this tag small, so I'm just going to call it C camera 2 video, camera 2 video image. This tag's going to be of a type string. Should make that uppercase. Let's put a line down there. Okay, so I've got my tag here. This is going to be used for implementation of my debug logs. So next step here, I just want to output when sessions are created and when they're closed. So I'm just going to add some debug to that. So let me just close that and go to the start preview first. So when we're configured is when a session is created. So let me add some debug there, and it's a matter of calling a log. It's going to be debug, so I'm going to filter out any other sort of trace logs happening. And I'm going to add my tag and plus some brief text, which will be start preview. Let me just make this preview started. I want to make this as small as possible because by debugging in these characters, by displaying these characters, we will have timing influences on here, timing delays, which can influence the behavior of our application. So this should probably really be happening on a background thread, and I might look at appending this to the end of this debugging tutorial series. So this is why I'm keeping this very small, because I don't want to affect the actual timing characteristics, because quite possibly the issue that we're seeing in the Samsung devices could be a timing issue. So by putting in debug logs, I could be influencing that with the debug logs timing. Okay, so on configured start, and so on close, I'm going to put some debug logs. And we'll call this preview closed. And we'll do the same thing for the start record. So record started. I need to put some and same again for on closed. So this will be record closed. So just to summarize what I've done here, I've now put debug logs in here, and I want to see when the session's being created and when they're being closed. The theory behind this is a recording session should be closed before our preview session is started. And by putting these debug logs in here, we'll be able to visualize if one session's been closed prior to another session opening. Okay, now I want to run this on my Nexus device here. The reason for that is this works fine, so I want to reproduce if the behavior I'm expecting I can see on my Nexus devices. Then I'll compare that against the Samsung device. Okay, so let's try running this and see what we see in our trace log. Okay, we can see that the preview's already started. Start recording. And we've got the preview closed at recording started. And we've got the preview started again, and we do have the recording session is closed. Okay, start recording again. And we've got the recording started and the preview closed there. And stop it to get back to the preview again. And we have the recording closed and the preview started again. So basically we are seeing that the close is being called on both sessions, and other sessions are starting. So we've confirmed that both sessions are closing, freeing up the surfaces for the new session So we're confirming that in this working device. So what we want to do is we now want to run this on the Samsung device and see if we get the same behavior. Now we'll run this on the Samsung Note 4 just to see if there's any difference in behavior. First thing I want to do is I've set the debug there, let me clear that, and I've put my tag in there because I'm seeing a lot of debug coming out of the Samsung device that I wasn't seeing in the Nexus device. So I'm just going to filter out on my tag here just so we can see what's happening. Okay, let's run the application on the device. Okay, preview started. Start recording. Preview's closed and recording started. Good. Now I went to stop recording and it's frozen. And that's it. So basically when I clicked stop recording to start the preview again, I'm not seeing close being called on the record capture session. So I suspect there might be a timing issue on this device, and what we're seeing here is that the record session's not closing properly or releasing its surfaces prior to starting the preview session again. Not on the Nexus devices, they're working fine, but I believe there's a timing issue, what we think a timing issue of one thing's not happening before the other's starting up, which is causing our problems there. And if I close this, we can see, yeah, we're getting the legal state exception. Camera device was already closed. So we have to prove that one session gets closed prior to the other session starting up, and we're not actually seeing that itself. So we're not seeing the record session being closed. So that's what I suspect the problem is. This has been a long tutorial, and debugging can take minutes, or it can take hours, or it can take days, it could take weeks or months if it's a difficult problem for debugging. So yeah, we'll conclude this tutorial at this stage. The following tutorial will be implementing a fix to our suspected problem. So as a detective might identify the culprit of a crime, we believe we might have identified the source of a problem, which is a timing issue in closing our preview session. So next part is to actually fix the problem. The detective will go out and try and capture the criminal. So there are parallels between being a real life detective and being a debugger who finds problems and then implements his fixes to those problems. Anyway, so the next tutorial we will be implementing a fix to that problem. If you want to get notified to the following tutorials or any other tutorials that I'm working on, don't forget to click on that subscribe button. And surrounding me is all my social media accounts, so if you want to get up to date with all the events and news of mobile application tutorials, you've got my social media accounts surrounding me. If you're on a PC, you can click on those, get taken to those accounts now, and directly above me is a link to my website. So all these tutorials do have a web article posted to them, as well as the tutorial itself, and that happen to be a good place to follow these tutorials because you can see the code changes, and there's also the information on how to get the code from GitHub. Anyway, that's all for this one. Bye for now.